Chapter 13. He never missed a marathon. He didn't care for the winners. Those Superman types hunting world records, slapping down the New York asphalt over bridges and up the extra-wide Baru avenues. Camera crews and cars trailed them, zooming in on every drop of sweat and veins jumping in their necks, and white cops on motorcycles too, to keep nuts from running out from the sidelines and messing with them. Those guys got enough applause. What do they need him for? The winner last year was his African brother, Dude, from Kenya. This year was a white guy from Britain. Built the same, skin color aside. Look at those legs, and you know they're going to be on the paper. Pros, training all year, jetting all over the globe to compete. It was easy to root for the winners. No, he liked the punch-drunk ones, half walking at mile 23, tongues flapping like Labradors, tumbling across the finish line by hook or by crook, feet pounded into bloody meat in their Nikes. The laggards and limpers, who weren't running the course but running deep into their character, down to the cave to return to the light with what they found. By the time they got to Columbus Circle, the TV crews have split. The coned cups of water and Gatorade litter the course, like daisies in a pasture, and the silver space blankets twist in the wind. Maybe they had someone waiting for them. Maybe they didn't. Who wouldn't celebrate that? The winners ran alone at the front. Then the race course filled up with a pack, the normal Joes crammed together. He came out for the runners, bringing up the rear and for the crowds on the sidewalks and street corners. Those New York mobs so oddball and lovely that they summoned him from his uptown apartment by a force he could only call kinship. Every November, the race pitted his skepticism about human beings against the fact that they were all in this dirty city together, unlike cousins. The spectators stood on tippy toes, bellies rubbing on the blue wooden police barriers that get rolled out for races, riots, and presidents, jostling for sightlines on the shoulders of daddies and boyfriends. Amid the noise, air horns, wolf whistles, and ghetto blasters shouting out old calypso tunes. Go, and you can do it, and you got it. Depending on the breeze, the air smelled of separate hot dog carts, or the hairy armpit of this tank-top chick adjacent. To think those nickel nights where the only sounds were tears and insects. How could you sleep in a room crammed with 60 boys and still understand you were the only person on earth? Everybody around and nobody around at the same time. Here everybody was around, and by some miracle you didn't want to wring their neck, but give them a hug. The whole city, poor people, and Park Avenue types, black and white, Puerto Ricans on the curb holding signs and national flags and cheering the people who'd been their opponents the day before in front of them at the AMP checkout, driving the last seat on the subway, walking like a walrus, too slow on the sidewalk. Competitors for apartments, for schools, for the very air. All those hard-won and cherished animosities fell away for a few hours as they celebrated a right endurance and vicarious suffering. You can do it. Tomorrow it was back to the front, but this afternoon the truce held until the last runner's last cheer. The sun was gone. November decided to remind everybody they lived in his kingdom now, ordering up guests. He exited the park at 66, darted between two cops on horses, reflected in the cops' sunglasses as a black minnow. The despairing spectators thinned when he got off Central Park West. Hey, man. Hey, hold up a minute. Like many New Yorkers, he had a crackhead alert system and turned stealing himself. The man grinned. You know me, man. Chicky Pete. So it was, Chicky Pete from Cleveland, a man now. He didn't run into a lot of people from the old days, one of the advantages of living north. He saw Maxwell one time at a wrestling match at the Garden. Jimmy Superfly Snuka in a steel match, swooping through the air like a giant ball. Maxwell was in line at one of the concessions, close enough to see the 6-inch scar on his forehead that leapt over his eye socket and gouged into his jaw. And he thought he saw pigeon-toed Birdie once outside Gristade's. Had that same curly golden hair, but the guy looked straight through him, as if he were in disguise crossing the border under false documents. How you doing, man? His old nickel comrade wore a green jet sweatshirt and red track pants that were a size too big, borrowed. Hanging in there, you look great. He pegged the energy correctly. Chicky wasn't a crackhead, but he'd been around the block a few times. But that two raw thing druggies have when they just get out of jail or a clinic. Here he was slapping him high-five, grabbing his shoulder, and talking too loud in a performance of gregariousness. A walking flinch. "My man, Chicky P. Where you headed?" Chicky P proposed. "A beer? Drinks on him." He begged off, but Chicky P couldn't hear of it. And after the marathon, perhaps a test of goodwill for his fellow man was in order, even when the fellow man hailed from the dark days. He knew Chips from his 82nd Street days. Before he moved uptown, Columbus was a sleepy stretch when he came to the city. Everything closed by 8 tops, and the neighborhood joints opened up the avenue, single bars and restaurants that took reservations. Like everywhere in the city, it's a dump, and then presto, it's the in thing. Chips was a proper saloon. Bartenders who attracted usual decent burgers. Conversation if you want it, and a nod if you don't. The only time he remembers something racial happening, this cracker in a Red Sox cap started going nigger this and nigger that and got kicked out in a hot minute. Harassing kids like to duck in on Mondays and Thursdays. Annie's shifts on account of her buyback policy and her bosom, both generous. After he got ace up and running, he sometimes took his employees out and brought them here, until he learned that if you drank with the guys, they took liberties. Show up late or no show with lame excuses. Or scruffy, their uniforms rumbled. He paid good money for those uniforms, designed the logo himself. The game was on, sound low. He and Chicky sat at the bar, and the bartender placed their pins on coasters advertising Smiles, a fern bar that used to be a few blocks up the street. The bartender was new, a white guy, a redhead with a pumpkin's manner. He liked to pump iron, his t-shirt sleeves as tight as rubber on his biceps, the kind of gorilla you hire for Saturday nights if you get a crowd. He put a 20, even though Chicky said drinks were on him. He used to play trumpet, he said. Chicky was in the colored band and made a splash in New York's talent show with a jazzy version of Greensleeves, if you recalled, a rendition that verged on bebop. Chicky smiled at that reminder's talent. That was a long time ago. My hands. He held up 2 fingers that curled like crab legs. He said he spent 30 days drying out. Mentioning that they sat in a bar seemed impolite, but Chicky always made accommodations with shortcomings. The boy had a ready little runt when he got to nickel, and regularly punked out his first year, until he learned to fight. And then he preyed on the smaller kids, taking them in closets and supply rooms. You teach what you taught. That and the trumpet thing was all he remembered about the nickel boy. Before Chicky started into his life after graduation, it was a familiar tune, one he'd heard over the years, not from nickel boys, but from dudes who spent time in similar places. A stint in the army, the routine and discipline appealed to him. A lot of guys went from GV into the armed forces. It's like a natural option, especially if you got no home to go back to, or want to go back to. Chicky was in the military for 12 years, and then he had a crack up and they drummed him out. Married a couple times, any job he could get. The best was selling stereos in Baltimore. He could go forever after hi-fis. I always drank, Chicky said. Then it was like the more I tried to settle down, the more I fucked up every night. Last May, he beat up a guy in a bar. The judge said it was either jail or a program, no choice at all. He was in town visiting his sister, who lived in Harlem. She letting me stay while I figure out my next move. I've always liked it up here. Chicky asked what he was up to, and Elwood felt bad telling him about his company, so he cut the number of trucks and employees by half. It didn't mention the office on Lenox, which he was quite proud of. 10-year lease. The longest thing he'd ever committed to, and it was weird because the only thing that bothered about it was that he wasn't bothered about it. My man, Chicky said, moving on up. Got a lady? Never settled down, I guess. I go out when work ain't so bad. I hear you. Light from the street dropped a shade as the taller buildings ushered a premature evening. It was a cue for a dose of the Sunday night back-to-work blues, and he wasn't the only one afflicted. There was a rush at the bar. The muscle-bound bartender served the 2 blonde co-eds first. Underage probably, and testing alcohol enforcement south of their Columbia University stomping grounds. Chicky ordered another beer, outpacing him. They started in on the old days, quickly sliding to the dark stuff, the worst of the housemen and supervisors. Didn't say Spencer's name, as if it might conjure him on Columbus Avenue like a Peckerwood spectre. That childhood fear still kept close. Chicky mentioned the Nickel boys he ran into over the last years. Sammy, Nelson, Lonnie. This one was a crook. That one lost an arm in Vietnam. Another one was stung out. Chicky said the last of the guys, he hadn't thought of in forever. It was like a picture of the Last Supper, 12 losers with Chicky in the middle. That's what the school did to a boy. It didn't stop when you got out. Bend you all kind of ways until you were unfit for straight life. Good and twisted by the time you left. Where did that leave him? How bent was he? You got out in '64? Chicky asked. You don't remember? What? Nothing. Time served, I told many times, when he slipped up and mentioned reform school, and they kicked me out. Went up to Atlanta, and then kept going north. I've been here since '68. 20 years. All this time he'd taken it as a given that his escape was a Nickel legend. The students passing his story around as if he were a folk hero, a stagger-lead figure scaled down to teenage size. But it happened. Chicky Pete didn't even recall how he got out. If he wanted to be remembered, he should have carved his name into a pew like everyone else. He lit another cigarette. Hey, Chicky Pete squinted. Hey, what happened to that kid you used to hang around with all the time? Which guy? The guy with that thing. I'm trying to remember. It'll come back to me, he said and split to the bathroom. He made a remark to a table gals celebrating birthday. They laughed at him when he went into the men's room. Chicky Pete and his trumpet. He might have played professionally. Why not? A session man in a funk band or an orchestra. Things had been different. The boys could have been many things had they not ruined by that place. Doctors who cured diseases or performed brain surgery. Inventing shit that saves lives. Run for president. All those geniuses. Sure, not all of them were geniuses. Chicky Pete, for example, was not solving special relativity. But they had denied even the simple pleasure of being ordinary, hobbled and handicapped before the race even began, never figuring out how to be normal. The tablecloths were new since the last time he was here, red and white checkered vinyl. Denise used to complain about the sticky tables in those days. Denise, that was the one thing he messed up. Around him, the civilians ate their cheeseburgers and drank their pints. In their free world cheer, an ambulance sped by outside, and in the dark mirror behind the liquor he had a vision of himself outlined, a bright red, a shimmering aurora that marked him as an outsider. Everybody saw it, just like he knew Chicky's story in 2 notes. They'd always been on the lam. No matter how they got out of that school, no one in his life stayed long. Chicky Pete just slapped him on the back on his return. He got mad suddenly, thinking about how knuckleheads like Chicky were still breathing and his friend wasn't. He stood. I gotta go, man. No, I hear you. Me too, Chicky said, with a surety that one who have nothing to do. I don't want to ask, Chicky said. Here it comes. But if you're looking for a hand, I could use your job. I'm sleeping on the couch. Right. You have a card? He started for his wallet and his ace moving business cards. Mr. Elwood, President. But thought better. Not on me. I can handle the work, is what I'm putting up there. Chicky wrote his sister's number on a red bar napkin. You ring up from the old days. I will. Once he made sure Chicky Pete was good and gone, he headed for Broadway. He had the uncharacteristic urge to take the bus, the 104 up Broadway. Take the scenic route and absorb the life of the city. He nixed it. The marathon was over, and his feeling of bonhomie was as well. In Brooklyn and Queens and in the Bronx and Manhattan, the cars and trucks had resumed ownership of the blocked-off streets. The marathon route disappeared mile by mile. Blue paint on asphalt marked the course. Every year it flaked away before you knew it, the white plastic bags skittering down the block, and the overflowing trash cans were back. McDonald's wrappers and red top crack vials crunching underfoot. He grabbed a cab and thought about dinner. It was funny how much he had liked the idea of his great escape making the rounds of the school, pissing off the staff when they heard the boys talking about it. He thought the city was a good place for him because nobody knew him, and he liked the contradiction that the one place that did know him was the one place he didn't want to be. It tied him to all those other people who come to New York, running away from hometowns and worse, but even Nickel had forgotten his story. Knocking Chicky for being a fuck-up when he was going home to his empty apartment. He ripped up Chicky Pete's red napkin and tossed it out the window. No one likes a litter bug. Popped into his head, courtesy of the city's new quality of life drive. A successful campaign, judging from the way it stayed with him. So give me a ticket, he said.